Well, joining me now is Thomas Sanderson. He's the Director for the Transnational Threats Project at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, and Jonathan Schanzer from the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Thank you both for joining me.
You're welcome.
Tom, if I can start with you. Islamic State has claimed responsibility. We don't have confirmation of that yet, but how likely do you think that it was IS?
Certainly very likely. They are the most active group right now. For some time they have dispatched fighters to Europe to seek retribution for the attacks on the Islamic State. And we know that at least 4,000 European passport-holding fighters have traveled to the battlefield. Many of these have gone back, so it's quite likely. In addition to that, the ISIS spokesman al-Adnani in September 2014 called for attacks using vehicles among other weapons. So I'd be very surprised if this was not ISIS-inspired or directed.
And that's an important distinction, isn't it? If it's inspired, it could be anybody, Jonathan, couldn't it?
It could. And we have these forums online that regularly radicalize individuals, people who are looking for guidance. I've actually heard already that there is a Telegram app, an encrypted app, where they were celebrating it. This is not ISIS itself, but really those who adhere to the ISIS ideology, and so they're celebrating it there. It could be possible that it was just simply individuals who picked up on exactly these messages.
Well, we've heard that 2 men were arrested, but police are now saying that they weren't the drivers of the van involved. Where does this investigation go? What are the authorities going to be focusing on right now?
Well, I think they're going to be going back to where the car was rented, where the truck was rented. They're going to be looking for identification. They're going to be looking for photographs. From there, they're going to start to try to unpack who these individuals are, who they're connected to. They're also going back to the intelligence services with the individuals that have already been picked up to try to also extend that network, try to figure out who they know and who else they might be connected to.
They will immediately raid the homes of these individuals. They will exploit any electronic media, the phones, the laptops, look at any emails they've exchanged, and that will almost undoubtedly provide some clues. But these operators used encrypted devices, they use throwaway cell phones. They're very good in how they operate, so it could be difficult.
And they're also increasingly using vehicles. I mean, this is incredibly low tech. Jonathan Schanzer, how easy is it for something like this to happen?
It's incredibly easy. I mean, all you need is a driver's license, maybe a credit card, maybe you can even just use cash or a burner credit card for that matter. Really, I think the hardest part is communication, doing so in an encrypted way, doing so in a way that will be off the radar of authorities, and then also identifying a target, making sure that there are no barriers, that there's nothing encumbering you as you look to carry out this attack.
Yeah, it was interesting watching Gordon's piece about the barricades that could be used. But these are incredibly soft targets. Are people actually prepared to have that kind of security in areas like Las Ramblas in Barcelona?
Well, you would have to put it everywhere. You know, there's so much confluence of pedestrians and cars around the world, especially in these popular tourist areas, that you would have to do that. You'd have to harden all of these sites, which wouldn't impede the pedestrians all that much, but it would certainly impede traffic. And that would be a problem for businesses that rely on vehicles and for tourists and for just citizens generally speaking.
So is this then becoming the new normal? I mean, it's an awful thing to suggest, but we are seeing more and more these cities being targeted in attacks like this.
I think it is the new normal. I mean, it's certainly the new normal already in places like Israel, and I think also in London. The question is, how much more does this spread thanks to ISIS spreading its ideology? Are we going to see attacks in the United States or in Canada or elsewhere? That's always been the question ever since 9/11. We've been talking about hardened targets in places where you see transport, right? So airports and bus stations and train stations, and we always wondered why we weren't seeing more attacks on these softer targets. Perhaps ISIS has brought that time to us.
I went through a small town in the Hudson Valley on the 4th of July weekend, and I noticed every street at this street fair was blocked by a dump truck, where, you know, growing up there would have been orange cones, but every street and every access point to the crowded areas was covered completely by dump trucks. There was a clear concern. It was obvious to me that they were concerned about someone ramming through the crowd, and I think that's unmistakable, and I think it's widespread now.
How extensive are these networks, even if they're of individuals? You say they're talking to each other. And how important is information sharing among the various intelligence agencies, and is it improving?
Look, it is a vast network. I mean, I think what I like to point to is the fact that at one point we believed that there were about 30,000 ISIS fighters in Iraq and Syria. We now believe it's down to probably under 15,000. I doubt that 15,000 of them have been killed. Many of them have returned home.
And are the authorities keeping track of them?
Well, it's virtually impossible to keep track of all of them. And so what you have is this growing network. If al-Qaeda was difficult to track in the last decade, imagine now what we're looking at with a much larger network of potential jihadi fighters, not to mention the recruiting networks that are based in these individual countries that may also be radicalized, may also be eager to carry out attacks, but didn't even fight in Iraq or Syria. So it is vast.
ISIS has a large store of passports that they have taken from fighters that have come around the world. Don't forget, more than 40,000 from 120 countries. And you again had 4,000 to 5,000 Europeans coming. My colleague and I interviewed a passport trafficker, among other things, on the Syria-Turkey border a couple of years ago. He had a Belgian passport on hand for $9,000. These are not difficult to get, and there's plenty of people who they can match up to the likeness of the individual on the passport. It is too easy to get through these countries.
And very often we hear that an intelligence organization, intelligence agency did know something. But even if they do, how do you join the dots? How do you use that intelligence to prevent something?
It's about prioritization. It's about an imminent attack. It's about having information, credible information, that an individual is prepared to carry out an attack. If they're not, if we lack that credible information, that name just goes into a database. And it just is very hard to hold these intelligence services accountable for not carrying out an action against them when there was no credible threat.
Because there is a suggestion, Tom,
Sure.
that the CIA may have known something.
Certainly, and that may have been one of dozens of pieces of intelligence or warnings that the CIA offered to the Spanish or the European services in the last 2 months, or it may have been part of hundreds. You know, there are a lot of intercepts going on constantly. We pick up code words, key names like Romulus or something like that, and they can give all of that to the services, but they have, again, priorities, as Jonathan said. There's a limited number of police out there, intelligence officers, and limited amount of money, and you can't put a person or a team on every single piece of intelligence that's out there. And so it's very difficult to know. It's easy to look back and say, oh, you received that information, but again, unless it was incredibly definitive and backed up and confirmed, it's hard to know in which direction to send your security services.
Is there any reason that Spain might have become more of a target? Because the last terrorist attack was 2004, 190 people killed in a train bomb. Why would they be targets now?
I think we're looking at a targeting of the West more broadly. That now as ISIS is being dislodged from Iraq and Syria, it is dispersing back to the host countries where these fighters originally came from. And so what we're looking at is the al-Qaeda-ization of ISIS, if you will. That if you recall, after al-Qaeda was dislodged from the Taliban, you saw the rise of a number of different cells immediately after 9/11, as well as affiliate groups. You know, these were semi-formal affiliates that were across the Middle East, from Yemen to North Africa to Iraq. We're seeing that again now, but with larger numbers, and you're seeing a lot of these fighters having come from Europe.
And don't forget, Al-Andalus has long figured in the mindset of al-Qaeda and other jihadi Salafi groups like ISIS. You also have the proximity to North Africa that Jonathan mentions. You have 150 to 200 foreign fighters that have come from Spain, far fewer than France and the UK, but still a significant number. But it is part of the broader targeting of the West and those members of the counter-ISIS coalition.
Tom Sanderson and Jonathan Schanzer, thank you both very much for joining me and talking about what is a very, very tragic situation in Barcelona today. Thank you.
You're welcome.